Now, Labour says too much too soon, but they don't exactly give us the details of what they would do. The Tories say they're a necessary evil and it's not their fault that they're having to implement them. And as for the Lib Dems, well, most of them agree with Dave. What am I talking about? Yes, you've guessed it, cuts back on the agenda again. But one venture capitalist thinks the government isn't being adventurous enough and believes the coalition should be cutting deeper and it should be cutting harder. Michael Buchanan brings us this report.
Who wouldn't want to live in Morpeth, a picturesque idyll in Northumbria? Public sector employees certainly do. More than half the workforce in the town are employed by the state. We're better, therefore, to bring a man who argues that the cuts should be deeper and faster.
The main thing about cutting faster is, yes, it'll be more painful. That's what people focus on. But it's worth it. It's worth it because if we cut quickly, we end up with a state at 40% of the economy, 60% of the economy is private sector. That can grow, that can generate jobs. That'll mean that in a few years you end up with a bigger economy, one where more people have jobs.
In the short term, what you are saying you'd get is the economy would go back into recession,
yep,
and you would have several 100,000 extra people unemployed.
That's as brutal as that, yeah. It'd be of those magnitudes.
But will locals be receptive to that argument? We went to meet Michael Bowman, a mental health worker for Northumberland Council, who've already announced the cuts will force them to shed 800 posts.
If you've got 800 people being taken out of employment, that's 800 salaries which aren't there to sort of spend in local services. So it's going to impact on sort of everything from shops, pubs, restaurants, all those sort of things will suffer.
John's argument, as far as the cuts go, is that the cuts should be deeper and they should be faster. In effect, there should be more pain now. What do you think of that?
Well, I dispute the basic premise on which that is based. Deficit sort of issues can be addressed by alternative means which don't involve making any cuts either in the public sector, that's in either health or local government, or cuts in the benefit sector. And that's about having a fairer and more progressive taxation system.
Don't forget, during the last 10 years or so, we've added near enough 1 million people to the public payroll. Did we need to do that? Could we not take some of those people out and see services still at an acceptable level? We are continuing to stack up the debt for our kids.
And I've seen that those sort of jobs created, certainly my own sort of sector, mental health, are essential jobs.
At the bowling club, the players have personal memories from previous recessions and are wary of any argument that pushes more people onto the dole.
If you've ever been made redundant, it's very painful.
You never forget it.
Oh, you never forget it. You never forget it because first thing comes in your mind, my house is going, what's going to happen to my family? Will I get another job?
But the choice is a bit of pain in the short term or more pain longer term as the debt eventually eats us alive.
You've got to really cut your own household according to what you have. And it's the same with any government. They've got to cut by what they've got to spend.
Morpeth was not wholly convinced by the need for faster, deeper cuts, which may explain why it's a businessman and not an elected politician who's making the argument.
And John Moulton is with us in the studio now. Right, so the government's currently making the tightest financial squeeze, we're told, since World War II, and you want them to squeeze and throttle even harder. Are you just looking at numbers or even considering the people's lives, where jobs may be lost and lives may be saved?
Start off, first of all, it's not the tightest squeeze since World War II. In fact, the government's expenditure is actually forecast to increase in each of the next 5 years. So it's nothing like the post-World War II actual cuts that were needed to carve into the deficits we had then.
Well, just tell me, I mean, because it's such a big ask at the moment, cut deeper, cut faster, cut harder, what proof do you have that this would work?
Proof is not possible to get perfect, I'm sorry. All you know is the very basics of life are, at the moment, half our economy is the state. Now, that half doesn't generate growth, it doesn't generate employment. So cutting the size of the state means that the economy can grow faster, it can grow employment, it can grow wealth, it can improve living standards. So at the moment we're not cutting the size of the state, we're actually banking on growth in the half of the economy which is private to bail out the half which isn't.
And when you say proof is hard to come by, but the things that we are able to present, for example, it's one of the things that have been a bit muffled this morning. On the first anniversary of the coalition, the Governor of the Bank of England has downgraded the forecast for UK economic growth.
Not a surprise. We are going to get weak growth as long as we have a large state. We cannot do anything else. Civil servants don't generate growth in the economy.
Charlie Faulkner, don't roll your eyes.
No,
Articulate it.
I
So he says, look, faster, deeper, that would be the plan.
I think the level of cuts that we've had have led to a stagnating economy. I think if you increased the level of cuts, then the stagnation will get worse. So I'm not in favour of what David's government is doing, but I'm certainly not in favour of what John Moulton is suggesting. I don't think the effect of what John Moulton is suggesting would lead to a booming economy. I think it would lead to a longer period of stagnation, which would have an effect on people's lives, as you rightly pointed out, but it would also have an effect on the time it would take for the economy to recover.
So let me just cut across you and say, you talk about the longer term.
I do.
At the moment, the government spends £5 for every £4 it gets in.
Yeah.
Right, so that £1 doesn't evaporate.
Yeah.
Somebody has to look after that £1.
Yeah.
They're called our children.
Well,
That's
John,
the people who are going to suffer for the excess spending today,
and
not
John,
you.
No, I understand. And John, the way that our economy gets better is by growth. And if you absolutely kill off economic activity, which is what you're proposing, it will take longer to get that growth, and our grandchildren will be paying.
On the issue of growth, because I want to go back to these figures today. So, David Willits, the latest downgrade of growth forecast follows 3 downgrades by the Office for Budget Responsibility. A year ago, OBR was talking about 2.6% growth. Are you a little bit nervous, and will you be able to hold to your course when you've got realities like this dawning?
Well, absolutely, we're holding to the course, and we must hold to the course. And the reason why what you've just heard from Charlie is so wrong is that if you look across to the continent, if you see the problems they've got in Greece, in Portugal, in Ireland, that's the warning. That's what would have happened if we hadn't tackled the deficit, if we hadn't got a grip on it. Now, I actually think, John pressing us even further is rather ambitious. We have done what was necessary in order to avoid the crisis that is overtaking some of the other economies of Europe.
I just wonder whether you think that John Moulton's analysis is right. It just comes at too high a cost. You would get greater economic growth, but politically it would just be too difficult to do.
No, I don't just think that. Actually, there was something that John said that I did disagree with, though I respect him as a businessman and industrialist. I don't just think of education and health as some kind of unproductive cost. I think those publicly financed services contribute to the well-being, and actually, though it's not the only reason, they contribute to the economic performance of our country. And I would not just regard them as some kind of dead weight on us. I don't think like that.
Just very, very finally, cutting back on core public services, can you guarantee that the voluntary sector would pick up the slack?
No, I can't. The reality is, for most of the last 50 years, we have not had half the state, half the economy in the state. Okay. We can manage at a lot lower level, and plenty of other countries do it perfectly well.
John Moulton, thank you very much.